Today, you're going to learn how to make a save system inside your Unity games, which means that you're going to be able to save data and then load it up again the next time the player actually starts up the game. It's just kind of a neat feature to have inside games that actually require some sort of progress. So we're going to learn how to do that in this video here. So with that said, there is a couple of different ways you can do this, and some methods are not too good when it comes to storing a lot of data, and some other methods are better for example, a logic game. And the best way to do that is actually to take that data and transform it into another file format, for example, a JSON file or binary file. It's just much better and much more efficient when it comes to having a system, like a save system inside your game. For this particular video, we're going to learn how to do that using a binary format. And I know some people are a bit scared of hearing that, but don't worry, it's going to be very simple and very easy to do. So just kind of follow along, and I promise you that you will have a save system up and running. So as you can see right now, I have a very basic game project inside Unity. There's basically nothing in here except for a player that has a player controller script attached to him, as well as a player behavior script. And right now the player behavior script has nothing inside of it, but my player controller does actually have a little bit of code just to make him move around inside the game, so we can actually do that. So if I were to go in here, I can actually press play, and then you can see that he's actually moving around inside the game, and that's basically it. He can't do anything other than that. So we're going to create a save system for this player so that when he is running around inside this scene, I can actually save the location of where he is, as well as how much health does he have, what is his experience, and what scene are we on right now, so you can load up the proper level inside your game. So we're going to do all that. So now the first step to creating a save system is to go inside your scripts folder and right click, go inside create, C#script, and then we're going to create a class that is going to be called SaveData. So we're just basically going to tell it that we want SaveData to be inside this class here. So I'm going to create that, make sure we spell it correctly. The first thing I'm going to do inside this class is I'm going to clean it up a little bit so we don't have all these comments going on. Now, essentially what you're going to do with this class is just include a bunch of fields that is going to store data that you want to save inside your game. So I can actually go ahead and remove my mono behavior because we don't actually need that. I'm going to move my methods down here because we don't actually need that either. And I'm just going to create the fields that I need for this particular class. Before we do anything though, we do need to make sure that this class is serializable, which means that we need this class to be able to be turned into binary data. And in order to do that, we do need to declare this class as a serializable class. So at the top here, I'm going to go ahead and go below my namespaces. We can actually go and delete those because we don't actually need those. And I'm going to say we want to have brackets system dot serializable. So now that we declared the class as serializable, we can now go into the class and we can create the fields that we want to have in order to save data. Now there's a couple of rules here when it comes to creating these type of data, and I will leave a link in the description so you can actually see the requirements for creating these. For example, you're not allowed to make a static field in here. You're not allowed to make them private. There's a couple of different rules that you have to follow. And like I said, there's a link in the description for that if you want to see them. So the first one I'm going to make is going to be a public. And I'm going to make this into an integer, and it's just going to be the current level. So I'm going to say underscore current level. I'm going to duplicate it 2 more times, and I'm going to change this one to player health. And the last one is going to be player experience, or player EXP. I do also want to include the position of the player inside the game, so I'm going to duplicate this 3 more times. I do also want to make sure that these are floats because we do want to make sure we have decimal points when it comes to the player position inside the scene. I'm going to change the first one into player location X. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other 2, but I'm going to change it into Y and Z. And that's basically what we just need to have in here. So if you have any other types of data that you want to have saved inside your game, you can add that in here and just kind of pile onto the list that we created. So now what we want to do is we want to take this class and we want to be able to turn it into binary format so we can actually store this data inside a local file on your computer. In case you don't know, the way that save system works inside a video game is that you actually go inside your local files on your computer and then you store a small file that handles all the different saved things inside your game. For example, you can have one for the settings of the game. You can also have one for just basic save data for loading up a level or something. There's many different things you can save inside your game, and that gets stored locally on the computer. I'm going to go ahead and include a path here so you can actually see where it gets stored, but that is where it's going to get stored in binary format. Every video game out there that you've tried that doesn't store the save data inside a cloud will actually store it locally on your computer in this sort of way. So don't be worried about anything breaking. We're not hacking or anything here. It's just how things are done. So with that, I'm going to go back inside Unity and I'm going to create a file that is going to be a SaveManager that actually handles saving the game inside our game. So I'm going to right click inside my scripts folder, create C# script, and I'm going to call this one SaveManager. The first thing we're going to do inside SaveManager is we're going to delete all the different things we have inside the classes. So we're going to delete the start method and the update method. And we're also going to delete the mono behavior because this is just going to be a normal class and not a mono behavior type class that we typically place onto game objects inside our scene. Before creating any type of fields or methods inside this class, we are going to go at the top here and add a couple of namespaces because we do need to have access to a couple of .NET namespaces so we can actually do some specific methods inside our code. The first namespace we're going to be adding is one called using system.io. And this is a .NET namespace that allows for us to read and write files as well as read and write certain paths inside folders. So we can perform certain methods that are related to, for example, getting directories and that type of thing, because we need to know where to save the data and actually tell it to create the appropriate folders that we want to have the saved data inside of. So we need to have this namespace for that particular purpose. We're also going to be adding a using system.runtime.serialization. This is also a .NET namespace that allows for us to serialize and deserialize certain objects inside our game. So for example, when we went into SaveData and said we wanted to be able to serialize this particular class here, then it's going to allow for us to actually do that. However, we do also need to add another line. And I'm just going to duplicate this line here because we're going to add something to it. I'm going to add the formatting method that we're going to be using. So formatters.binary, which is what I said we're going to be using for this particular episode here. And this basically just allows for us to take the serialization and turn it into binary. So we can actually store it inside our local computer and also allow for us to take the binary and deserialize it back into a object that we can use inside our game. And that's basically all the namespaces that we need in here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in the path as well as the file name that we want to create for this particular save file inside our local folder inside our computer. So I'm going to create a couple of fields for that. So I'm going to go inside my class and say I want to create a public static string data type, and I want to name this one as directory name. Now, the thing that we're going to be storing inside this field here is going to be the path name for this particular save file. So inside my local files on my computer, we're going to create a folder that we're then going to put the save file into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name that particular folder that I want to create, and I can call it something like SaveData. So I'm going to duplicate this, and instead I'm going to call this one file name, because we also want to have a name for the file, and then we want to change it into something like savefile.txt. Now you can make this into any kind of file format that you want, just kind of make it into a TXT file if you want to do that, because it's not really going to matter because it's going to be binary. But just so you have a file format for this particular file, just add the TXT afterwards. After creating this, we do want to create a couple of methods so we can actually handle loading and saving and doing all these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and create a public static void. I'm going to call this one save, parentheses, curly brackets. And then I want to make sure I pass in my save data, the one that we have inside our save data class that we created at the beginning. So I do want to say I want to pass in a save data object, which I'm just going to call save data. Like I said, it's just so we can pass in the data that we have inside that particular class once we do actually have some data to get, the player health and the location of the player. Then we pass it in here so we can turn it into binary format. The first thing I want to do inside this particular method is check if the directory that we want to place the save file actually already exists. And if it doesn't, then we want to create that particular path. So I'm actually going to copy this method here, paste it below. And I do want to change this into a Boolean statement so we can actually get a true or false statement if that particular path exists inside the game. And I'm going to call this one directory exists. And we can actually go ahead and delete the data that we're passing into the actual method. And then I actually want to use the system.io namespace that we added in to return the directory dot exists. And then I want to add application dot persistent data path. Now, the cool thing about this method here is that it's going to return the place inside your local computer that you actually stored data from video games. So no matter if you're sitting on a Mac, a Linux, or Windows, it's going to return that from all 3 different operating systems. And then I'm basically just going to say I want to add a string to it, which is going to be a /. And I want to add the directory name that we added up here, just to kind of check if that folder already exists. And if it does not, then we want to do something inside this method that we created up here called save. So I'm just going to say that we want to check for an if statement inside our save method here. And I'm just going to check for if directory does not exist. Then I want to create the directory inside our local files. So I'm going to say directory dot create directory parentheses. And then I'm just basically going to copy what we have down here and say I want to create that directory inside our local files. So now that we did that, the next thing we want to do is we actually want to start up this binary conversion process where we actually serialize the data that we have inside our SaveData into a binary format. So I actually do need to instantiate a new binary formatter essentially. So what you're going to do is you're going to say that you want to have a binary formatter, and I'm just going to name it binary formatter, just so we have some kind of name that kind of makes sense to it, so we know what it is. And then I want to just instantiate a new binary formatter, parentheses, and semicolon. And this, by the way, is using that particular using namespace that we added up here at the very end. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to create a new binary file inside this location that we added in. So I'm going to go to the next line and say I want to add a file stream. And I'm going to call this one save file. Then we're going to call upon a method called file.create, parentheses, semicolon. And then we're going to be adding in the file that we want to create here, but we don't actually have that yet. So let's actually go and scroll down a little bit, copy that class that we created that actually checked for the directory, and now create one that actually returns the file path and not the directory path, which means that it's just going to go in to that path that we created, and it's going to create that file with that particular name that we added in. So I'm going to name this one get file path name. And then I'm just going to return the actual file path. So we're going to delete directory.exists. And then we're going to add something at the end here, which is just going to be the same way as we'd added the directory name. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy, paste it in. Do make sure you check for spelling errors here, by the way. And then I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the file name at the very end here. Now, this is going to return as a string and not as a Boolean. So we do want to make sure we go up here and say you want to return this as a string format. And with this, we can now take this particular method here, paste it inside our create method up here, which is going to create that file inside that path. So with the binary file now created, the next thing we need to do is we need to serialize the actual data inside the SaveData class that we created at the beginning. So on the next line, we're going to say we want to access a binary formatter dot serialize, parentheses. And then we want to grab the actual file that we created, the binary one. And I also want to give it the actual data from the object that we want to pass into this binary file, which is going to be the data that we pass into the save method that we have up here. So it's going to be the one called SaveData. And then something we need to do at the very end here, which is very important to do, otherwise you will get errors inside your game, which is that we do want to close off this file stream that we created up here after we're done using it. So we're going to say savefile.close, parentheses. With that, that's everything that you need in order to be able to save data inside your game. So the next thing we're going to create is a method that allows us to load back in the data and deserialize the binary so we can actually turn it into an object that we can then use inside our game. So I'm going to go down to the next line here, and I'm going to say we want to create a public static. And the return type that I want to have here is going to be the object that we want to use in order to store the data inside the game when we actually want to read the data, which in this case is going to be the SaveData class that we created. So this is going to be a SaveData object type that we want to return. And I'm going to call this one load, parentheses, curly brackets. So now, because we're actually returning a SaveData object from inside this method here, because we told it to inside the creation of the method, I do also want to make sure that we declared the actual SaveData object that we're going to return later. So we're going to say we want to have a SaveData data type, and I'm just going to call it SaveData. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to check if we do already have a save file inside the path that we created the save file, because if not, then there's no save file to load. So we want to make sure we do a error handler just to kind of check for that. So I'm going to go down and say we have a if statement, And inside this if statement, I'm going to check for the actual path and the file that should exist inside that path. So I'm going to go below this method here, and I'm going to create a new public static boolean. And this one is going to be named SaveData exists, parentheses, curly bracket. And inside of here, we're just basically going to be returning the actual file path name to see if that file exists in here. So you're going to write file.exists. Then we're going to check for the get file path name. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and copy the name of it and paste it inside our if statement to check for this. And I want to say that if we do not find a file, then I actually want to take this save data and I want to return it as null inside my method here. And we can also go ahead and debug just so we know exactly what is going on here. So we can say debug.log failed to load data. Then I want to create a else statement because in case we do actually succeed in this, then I do want to do a try catch method, which is something where we can run a certain statement. And if it fails, then it's going to do a catch and actually catch the exception and tell us what went wrong. So we can do a catch at the end here. And the message we want to give us if it actually fails is we want to get a serialization exception, which is going to tell us what went wrong with the serialization that we tried to do here. And then again, we want to return a save data that is set to null because it failed. So we don't want to set save data equal to anything. And we're also going to debug.log failed to load data. However, if we did actually succeed and we run this code successfully inside the try method that we have here, I do actually want to do the same thing as we did up inside the save file, which is that we want to create or instantiate a new binary formatter. So I'm going to do that in here. We do also need to create a new file stream. So I'm just going to copy what we have up inside our save method, paste it below here. And then I'm going to say we want to create a load file instead of a save file, which is going to be equal to file.open. Then I want to get the full path name, but we do also need to set a file mode. So we're going to say file mode is going to be open. And this just basically opens the binary file that we have inside the file path location that we set inside our create file path. And the last thing we need to do here is we need to go down and actually deserialize the data from inside the binary file and turn it into a saved data object that we can actually interpret inside Unity. So I'm going to say that I want to take my saved data and I want to set it equal to whatever we're deserializing here. In this case, we're going to grab a binary formatter dot deserialize. And I'm going to say that I want to deserialize the file that we just grabbed using the file stream here, which is going to be the binary file. So I'm going to paste that one in. And I do also want to make sure that right now it's actually giving me an error message because it's going to return as an object, but not as a saved data object type. So I want to actually do something called casting that allows me to turn this into a saved data object type. And we do that by writing parentheses in front of it and then adding in what we want to cast it into. And then of course we do also need to close it off, otherwise we're going to get error messages. I'm just going to copy what we have up inside the save method, go below here, and I want to say that we want to close off the load file and not the save file. We do of course need to return the saved data, otherwise we're going to get an error message because it does require that we return a saved data type. So I'm going to go after the if statements and I'm going to say I want to return save data. And with this, we now have everything that we need in order to create a save and a loading system inside our game. So in order to test this out, I'm going to go inside my player behavior script, which is attached to my player inside the game. And I should mention that this is the part where your game is most likely going to be very different from what I'm doing here. Because in my case here, I just want the player to be able to save using a button on the keyboard. But maybe you're creating a game where you have orbs floating around in the levels. And when you touch the orb as the player, then there's a script attached to the orb that allows you to do what we're going to do in this particular code here. So do keep in mind that I'm just creating a player behavior script that really could be anything inside my game that allow for me to save the game when I'm pressing a certain keyboard button on my keyboard. Now, inside my saved data, I did actually tell it that I wanted to be able to save the current level. And because I added that one particular thing that I wanted to save inside my saved data, I do actually need to add a namespace to be allowed to go inside and grab the scene names inside my project. So I'm going to say Unity Engine dot scene management, which is everything that we need to add. So now we can actually grab the index of the scene that I'm currently inside of with my player. So inside my update, I'm going to say that I want to check for a certain keyboard input. So I'm going to run a if statement. And inside the if statement, I want to check for a input dot get key down, parentheses. And I'm going to check for a key code, which is going to be the K key, just so we, when we press K, it's going to save, and when I press L, it's going to load. I'm going to duplicate this if statement, because I also want to create one where I check for the L key, just so we have it. And then I think the first thing we're going to be doing inside each of these is that we're going to be debugging that we're actually saving or loading the game, just so we know exactly what is going on, and knowing that these are actually happening inside our console. So I'm going to do a debug.log. So I'm going to be debugging that I'm actually saving the game right now. Then I'm going to copy it, paste it inside my L key, and say that I'm loading the game instead. And now all you need to do is you actually need to assign data to the data inside the SaveData file, the one that we created here. You're going to assign data to all these fields, and then you're going to be running the save method that we created inside our SaveManager, and it's going to take all this information and turn it into binary. So at the top of my player behavior, I'm going to create a SaveData data type, and I'm going to call this one underscore save data. Then I'm going to copy it, paste it inside my update method, and I'm just simply going to say I want to grab the different fields and assign them to something. So I'm going to say I want to take my underscore current level, and I want to set it equal to the current active scene inside my game. So I'm going to say scene manager, which again, we needed to add in at the top here with the namespace so we can actually do this. Scene manager dot get active scene, which is the current scene that we have inside our game, parentheses, dot built index, which is going to be the index of that current scene that we actually set inside our game project in the export settings. Then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to name the next one underscore player health, just so we have something. I'm going to set this one equal to something random, so we could just go ahead and say I want to set it equal to 10. Actually, no, let's set it equal to 100. That probably makes sense. I'm going to duplicate it again. Player EXP for experience. And I'm going to set this one equal to 4025. And then lastly, we need to also grab the player location. So I'm going to duplicate this one more time. And I'm going to say that I want to grab the player location, the X one, and I'm going to set it equal to the current X-axis location of my player inside the current scene. So we can just go ahead and say we want to grab the game object that this script is attached to because it's attached to my player, GameObject.transform.position.x. Then I'm just going to duplicate this 2 more times and change this one to Y and the next one to set. And make sure you capitalize and non-capitalize the correct places. And then the last thing we need to do is actually run the actual save method that we have inside our SaveManager so we can store all this data inside a binary save file inside our computer. So I'm going to say that I want to grab my SaveManager.save, parentheses, and then I want to pass in the game object that I want to actually turn into binary. Because remember, when we created this method inside our SaveManager, if I go up to my save, you can actually see that we need to pass in a piece of data, which is going to be of the SaveData data type. So I'm going to go back inside my play behavior, take my SaveData data type that I just assigned all the data to, and I'm going to pass it inside my save. And the only thing you really need to do when it comes to loading the game is just kind of run the load method that we have in there. So I'm just going to copy this line of code, and I'm just going to pass it inside my load condition down here. And I'm going to remove what we have inside the parentheses because we don't actually pass data inside the load method. And I'm going to change the method to load. I do also want to make sure that I actually take my SaveData game object that we have up here and set it equal to what we load in because it's returning a SaveData data type. So we need to make sure we actually assign that to the current SaveData that we have inside our game. So now it's actually loaded in the binary and transformed it back into a SaveData data type, and then replaced it with everything that we have in here. And then in my case here, because I actually stored the player location, I want to be able to actually teleport the player to where he needs to be loaded in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say that I want to take my game object dot transform dot position is equal to new vector 3 parentheses, semicolon, and then I'm just going to pass in my SaveData location X, pass it in here, comma, pass in my Y location, comma, and my set location. And just like this, we are now done with everything. So I can actually go into Unity. Inside the player, we have a player behavior script attached to it, which is right here. But right now, we can't actually see anything that's going on. Like, we want to be able to see what is going on in the backend. So I'm going to go back inside my code. So just for testing purposes, I'm going to go up and serialize field my SaveData data type. So we can actually see it inside the inspector. So with that saved, I'm going to go back inside Unity, and it's just going to compile for a second. And then you can see we have all the data in here that we actually want to store. Now, right now, we haven't saved anything inside this particular game here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play. I'm going to move around for a little bit, and I'm actually going to change the position of my player. I'm going to save the game, which is K. And then you can see, oh, it actually gets saved here. So we can now see that it filled in the data. But not just that, but it should actually have taken this data and saved it inside a binary file inside our SaveData location on our computer. So if I were to go ahead and move somewhere up here and I were to load in the data by clicking L, you can see we now teleport back down to the bottom because that's where I stored my location when I saved the file. So, teleport me back to where I was supposed to load into the game. So essentially that would be the same thing as going into the menu of the game and then say load game, and then it loads you back into that location down there. As you can see, if I go inside my local files, inside my computer, inside that path that I showed at the beginning there, we can actually see that we have a SaveData file. And if we were to actually open up this file, just so we can check it out and see what is going on in here, you'll actually notice that it's going to be gibberish. Like, you're not going to be able to actually read what is going on in here. It's just going to be, weird symbols and words and stuff like that. But just to kind of show you that it's actually stored inside the file path locally on your computer. So with that said, you now have a functional save file system, which should hopefully work for you. If anything went wrong, double check for typos. I can guarantee you 99% of the time people tell me in the comments that, it's not working for me. I'm getting errors and I did everything that you did. I can guarantee you 99% of the time they made a typo or they changed something, or because they're sitting with a different project than mine, they didn't follow my tutorial 100% even though they say they did. So make sure you double check for everything if you're getting error messages. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you guys next time.